it asks us to create a list of IDs, a list of pins, and we're supposed to check if there's a user and if they enter the right password. If the person is not a user, then it says, what does it say? Sorry, no match is found. If you is the right user but the wrong password, then it also says sorry, no match is found. If the user ID and the pin correspond to each other, then it says access granted. So I created my list of IDs and a list of pins. So my first ID corresponds to my first pin in my list. My second ID corresponds to my second pin. My third to my third, and so on and so forth. So after I created my list of IDs and pins, I'm going to ask my user to enter their ID and change that to an integer, since my ID and my pins are all integers. I'm also going to have a variable for pin entry, and I'm going to ask my user to enter their pin. So now I'm going to create a variable for x. I'm going to say x equals 0. Then I'm going to create a for loop. So this for loop is going to be checking I'm going to be checking if any of the ID entry is within my list, right? So I'm going to say for I in ID. So for my element variable in I, so I is going to be equal to each of these elements, right? Then I'm going to check if my ID entry is equal to I in any of these instances. And then if this is true, I'm also going to check if my pin entry is equal to pin x. So my x variable is keeping count of which index I am at in my list. So if I'm at index 0 for my ID, I want to be at index 0 for my pins, right? So this x variable is keeping count of which index I'm at. Everybody okay with that so far? Yeah. So I created a for loop. In my for loop, I'm checking if ID entry equals I. So if what I entered, my ID entry, equals any of these, then that's going to be true. And then I'm going to move to this if statement. Now, let's say in this for loop, let's say in this first iteration, my ID entry is 11. And I said my ID is 11, and my ID entry, I also entered 11. So this is true. So now, remember I made x equal to 0. So now I'm checking if pin entry is equal to pin x. So that's pin 0. So what's pin 0? Pin 0 is 12. So that means, so if ID entry equals 11 and pin entry equals 12, then I'm going to point out access user found logging in. Because I'm at the right position for my pin and I'm at the right position for my ID. So that means I'm going to print user found. And I'm going to add one to x, and I'm going to break my function
from the loop.
Yeah, because I'm going to break my function from the loop, because that means I don't have to go to the rest of the loop. I already found the user. If I'm at 11 and 12, or if I'm at 44 and 45, there's no point in going through the rest of the loop, because I already found the user, right?
So if you need to break what would that?
So after I check 11 and 12, it might go on and check the other numbers. So then I have a else. So I have a else function for this. So if my ID entry is not equal to I, so if I never entered any of these values in my when I entered my ID, if I never entered an ID that was within my list, else I'm just going to add one to my x. So I'm going to check all of these numbers, and if none of them are equal, I'm going to add one to my x, so I could check the next variable in my pin, by the next element in my pin. So first I'm going to check this one, next I'm going to check this one, next I'm going to check this one, just to see if I could find a match between either my IDs or my pins. And then for my last if statement, I'm going to say if x equals 10. So if x equals 10, that means I've gone through every single element in my list. I said x equals 10 strategically because I have 10 elements. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that means if I added 1 to my X 10 times, that means I went through all my IDs. I'm going to print sorry, no match is found. Because I've looked through every single ID, and then I realized there was none of my IDs matched to my pins. Everybody okay? I'm going to keep this on the board. I'm going to allow you all to go for a break, and you all can come back and take a look at it. Oh, I'll copy and paste it and put it in a WhatsApp group. Oh, yeah, the projector is not that great. But yeah, you'll have a 10-minute break. So, objectives for today, students should be able to use functions, differentiate between local variables and global variables, use parameters effectively, and use the return values effectively. Should. So functions. So a function is a set of code that you give a name so that you can run that set of code whenever you want in your program without copying the code. The benefit of this is if you need to change the code, you don't have to look everywhere in your program for it. You could go to that function and change the code. Especially if you want to run that code multiple times, instead of having to write it out multiple times, you could just call that function. It also helps the code to be more organized by separating it into different bits and pieces of code instead of just having one long drawn out piece of code. So let's take a look at some code without any function. So I have print hello, welcome. Then I ask the user to enter the name. The user enters the name and then I greet them again and tell them hello, welcome. So we can see that I used the code of print hello and print welcome twice. And what if I wanted to do this 3-4 times? Like if I wanted to ask the user to enter the name 4 times and also tell them hello and welcome each time a new user enters the name. To do this, I could create something like a function so that I don't have to print out hello, welcome 3, 4, 5 times. I could create a function. So let's take a look at our syntax for our function. I'm defining a function. I'm calling my function greet, my parentheses and a colon to print hello and print welcome. So I call the function greet, and since I call this function, everything inside of this function will run, and then it will go on to the next line. So then I'll ask the user to enter their name, they'll input their name, and I call my greet function again. So then I'll print hello, welcome. Everybody with me? So enter a name. Manasseh. What's your output?
Hello, welcome, Manasseh.
So hello, welcome. You enter your name. Please enter your name. You enter Manasseh, and we'll tell you hello, welcome again. So I want everybody to take note of the syntax for defining a function using.
Oh, you have to define.
So you have to use def. Use anything, any word that you want to define your function. Maybe you call it greet or welcome, open. But you can't use any of the keywords that are in Python. Stuff like sum and list and all of those are keywords that you can't use. Okay, so let's look at another program without any function. So I want to print out a box of asterisks. I print out this long line of asterisks, then I print out 2 asterisks spaced apart, print out 2 asterisks spaced apart, print out 2 asterisks spaced apart, and print out this long line of asterisks again. As you can see, there's a couple lines of code that has been repeated, and we could put them into a function so that we don't have to repeat those lines of code each time. So let's say we define a function called display edge, and inside our function we're running the code print and this line of asterisks. So this is our code within display edge. So I'm going to call the function of display edge. So I'm going to display that line of asterisks. Then I'm going to print out my sides. And I'm going to call my function display edge again, and that's going to print out this code, this line of asterisks. But do we realize we could create another function, right?
Yeah.
So let's create another function. We're going to create a function display side. So for display side, I'm going to say is these 2 asterisks with a space in between. And now to create my box, all I have to do is I'm calling a function display edge, display side, display side, display side, and then display edge. So if I wanted my box to be longer, I could just call the function of display side some more times and then display edge at the end. So now let's make this even a little bit shorter, because what if we wanted to write display edge 100 times to make a really, really large box? We can use a for loop with our function. So we create 2 functions for display edge and display side. So we display our edge, we call the function we display our edge. Then say for I in range from 0 to 3. we're displaying our side. So that means, how many times we're going to display this side? 3 times. And then we're going to display our edge again. So if I wanted to display if I wanted to make my box larger and display my side, what would I do to change this code? I place 7 there. So this for loop will run 7 times, and I'll run this side, display side 7 times, and I could get a even larger box. So if I wanted to do it 100 times, I could just pass 100 inside of it, and I could make a really large box. Instead of having to print out this 100 times. Okay, so we can also use functions inside of functions. So let's say we display our edge, we create our function of display edge, we pass it as, we print out this line of asterisks, we define our side, these 2 asterisks. Then we define something, our function called rectangle, or the display rect. So we're going to display our rectangle, we have to call our function of display edge. Then we use our for loop for I in range 3, and then we display our side. We display our side these 3 times, and then we display our edge again. And this is our function for displaying a rectangle. Once we want to display a rectangle, we call this function, and we'll display this exact rectangle.
So if you wanted to do more than 1 rectangle?
So if I wanted to do more than a rectangle, I will just call this function 2 more times, and to print out this rectangle that's 3 sides long.
So you can just put it like in a for loop or something? Or
Yeah, I could put it in a for loop, and then I could create more and more boxes.
Yeah, that's exactly for now.
So everybody with me?
Yeah.
So let's move on to local and global variables. So when a variable is created created outside of a function, it is known as a global variable, and it can be used inside of any function. When a variable is created inside of a function, it is known as a local variable, and it can only be used inside of that function. So if we create a variable inside of our function, it can only be used inside of that function, unless we do something with it. Other functions can have a local variable with the same name, but these will have different variables. So let's look at what I'm talking about. So I'm going to define a global variable outside of my function as x equals 5. So then I'm going to define a function. I'm going to define a function and call it my function. Then I'm going to create a local variable of y equals 7. Then I'm going to say print out x and print out y inside of my function. I'm going to call my function, and then I'm going to say print x, print y. When I call my function, what do you think my output will be? Any guess, what do you think my output will be when I run this code?
Okay, it will basically do that twice. The y is equal to 7, it will print 5. It will print, but x.
Print x.
X of 5, 7.
So we'll print 5 and 7.
Yeah.
The reason why it prints our x is a global variable which can be used anywhere. So you'll print out x. Y is inside our function, so you'll print out 7. Right?
But the second time it will print 5, but not 7.
So, right. So now here I'm saying print x. So you'll print 5, right?
Yeah.
But when I say print y, I will get an error. Because y is not a global variable. Y can only be used inside of this function.
So will it print false?
No, it won't print false, you will get an error. You get a red set of text. And because it will tell you something like it cannot find this variable. The reason why I cannot find this variable is because you've been looking for a list of global variables and realize that it's not there. Everybody okay with that so far?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to take a look at parameters. So a lot of times we don't want a function to be too specific. There may be some local variables in the function that we do not want to give a specific value in the function itself. Instead, we want to specify the local variable's value when we call the function. These sorts of variables are called parameters. We could see this better in an example. So, in this example, before we create any parameters, we're going to define a rectangle. We're going to display our edge. We're going to create a variable of x, and we're going to say x is equal to 3. Then we're going to say for I in range x, display our side, and then display our edge. So what this does is, we could change our value of x, and we could create a bigger rectangle, right? But every time I want to create a bigger rectangle, I have to go back to my function and change this value of x. But what if when I'm calling my function, I want to use this exact same code, but all I have to do is change this value of x a few times. So I have to use display rectangle, then I have to print a rectangle that's size 3, then I have to print a rectangle that's size 5, and a rectangle of size 6. Now right now, this code to do that, every time I want to do that, I have to change this value of x. And now that's a bit cumbersome. So what I can do is create a parameter. So let's say I define my function for display edge, I define my function for display side. But now when I'm creating my function of display rectangle, I'm passing a parameter of x. So this x, when we're calling our function, we could pass a value. When I'm running a function, I say display edge, and then I say for I in range x. So right now this range or our function. Now when we're calling our function, what we're going to do is we're going to say display rect, and we're going to pass a number inside, and this number is going to correspond to x. Now
so
this
you
x
can change the value of x anytime.
Yeah, so now we can change the value of x anytime. So when I'm calling this function, I could make x equal to 3. Then I could call the function again to make x equal to 7. And this will create a small box and a bigger box. So this will create a rectangle with 3 sides, and then this will create a rectangle with 7 sides. Everybody okay so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at what our output will look like. So our output will look something like this. We have our edge. We have 3 sides, 1, 2, 3, our edge. Then we call our function again, so we display the edge. This time we're substituting 7 for our range. So we're going to do this 7 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then we're going to display our edge again.
3.
So we could also pass multiple parameters. A function can have as many parameter values as it needs. The parameter variables are listed in parentheses next to the function name. So let's look at another function with no parameters. So let's say we define a function called numbers. And then we're going to say first equals 1 and last equals 100. So for range in first to last plus 1, I'm going to print out I. So it prints the numbers out from 1 to 100. But right now, again, if I wanted to print out a different range, I would have to change this value of
because
first.
remember, I'm taking the one before, so it will
Yeah.
take 99.
Oh.
So what if I wanted a range of 50 to 100? That means I'll have to go and change my value of first to 50. Then, well, I keep my 100 the same. So if I want to do 50 to 150, I have to go and change my value of 1 to 50 again, and then change my value of 100 to 150. Each time I want to just change 2 variables that are in my function. So instead of doing that, I could create 2 parameters. I'm going to make this program a little bit better by defining my function with numbers and passing 2 parameters. The first number and the last number. Then in my code I'm going to say for I in range, this variable first and this variable last, and then I'm going to print out I within this range. So when I'm calling my function, I'm going to say print numbers, open parentheses. I'm going to say 5. So this 5, this first number is going to correspond to our first parameter, and this second number is going to correspond to our second parameter. And this is going to, what is this function going to do?
5 to
5 to 25. And this one?
negative 100.
Cool. Okay, so let's look at, let's open our problem set. No, there's still more to do, but.
Well, now
Okay, so here's a few quick examples I want you to try. So let's write a function which greets the user, asks them for the, so our function, it greets the user, it asks the user for the name, and displays a welcome message. Right? Write a program which calls the function 3 times. So I want you to create a function. Your function is supposed to greet your user, ask them for their name, tell them hello, welcome, whatever you want to tell them, how are you doing. And then I want you to call the function 3 times. Start typing. Huh? No, it's supposed to be easy. Just for you to get a hang of using functions. You have to create a function that greets your user, tell them hello or welcome. Then it asks the user for their name, and then display a welcome message. Say welcome, how are you doing, or something, whatever you want to say. And then you have to call that function 3 times. So it's like you're greeting 3 different people.